Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. A dissonant frequency, out of place in the slumber and quiet of my apartment, snagged my consciousness. Not the familiar groan of settling timbers or a sudden impact, but a sharp, mechanical whine that sliced through the stillness. Instantly, alertness flooded me. I bolted upright in bed, the frantic tattoo of my heart echoing in my ears, a cold film of sweat blooming on my forehead despite the room's chill. Shoving my arms into a t-shirt, I moved, drawn toward the living room, the source of the disturbance. With each footfall, the insistent drone intensified, resolving into a sound like tiny tires spinning, a circular friction against the floor. An auditory hallucination, perhaps? Some noise bleeding in from the street? No, the origin was undeniably internal. My fingers, trembling slightly, found the hallway light switch. I flexed my hands, knuckles white, trying to anchor myself against the rising tide of unease, a knot tightening low in my gut. A premonition. Earlier, a visiting cousin had offloaded a remote-controlled car, a leftover from some holiday gathering. Its previous owner had meticulously removed the batteries, leaving it inert on the living room table. A harmless piece of plastic, I'd thought. No power, no potential for action. But as I crept toward the threshold of the living room, a chilling certainty crystallized. The sound emanated from that very toy. I paused, hugging the doorframe. The living room lay submerged in shadow, save for the faint pool of light cast by a small corner lamp, a concession to my dislike of absolute darkness. There, on the bare wooden floor, sat the car. Headlights dark, its wheels blurred in a ceaseless rotation, carving invisible circles. It ground itself around and around, plastic biting into wood with a grating persistence. A glacial cold seeped into my limbs. My breath hitched, shallow and quick. Across the room, on the sofa's armrest, lay the remote control, its power toggle visibly in the off position. And the car itself, I knew with unshakable conviction, held no batteries. Motionless, I fought to reconcile the scene with reason. I scrubbed at my eyes, hoping to clear some perceptual fog. My gaze flickered to the sofa, the remote undisturbed. Stepping cautiously into the room, I confirmed the car's autonomous motion. This wasn't gravity coaxing it down some imperceptible slope. It was locked in a precise repeating loop, wheels churning at a steady, unnerving velocity. The thudding in my ears intensified, that visceral pulse signaling something fundamentally wrong. My mind scrabbled for explanations. Forgotten spares? A switch accidentally left on, powered by some phantom capacitor? Implausible. Any residual charge should have dissipated in moments, not fueled this relentless circling. A few more hesitant steps brought me closer. The urge to snatch it up warred with a primal instinct screaming retreat. My skin prickled, the air thick with unseen tension, as if approaching a baited snare disguised as a child's plaything. The mechanical hum drilled into my hearing. Swallowing past the constriction in my throat, I reached down, my fingers closing around the cool plastic roof. The wheels whirred against my palm for a heartbeat, before I located the small switch on the chassis. It was already clicked firmly to off. A band tightened around my chest. My breath caught. Still turning. Even with the switch disengaged, the wheels spun. Lifting the car, I carried it to the table, flipping it over, searching for any anomaly. Nothing. The battery compartment gaped, empty and clean. No stray AAs, no hidden power source. Yet the plastic shell vibrated in my grasp, a faint, stubborn energy fighting to persist. I applied pressure, squeezing the chassis, trying to still the wheels. They resisted for another second, then abruptly ceased. Silence crashed in, amplifying the frantic drumming of my own heart. My eyes swept the room. Sofa, unoccupied, remote, inert, blinds drawn, television, dark. Only the sound of my own ragged breathing filled the void. I placed the car back on the table, my gaze fixed on it, waiting. Seconds stretched. Nothing. The wheels remained still. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave, tension easing from my shoulders. I exhaled slowly. A glitch then. Some bizarre electrical fluke, a temporary surge in dormant circuits. It had to be. Turning, I started back toward the hallway. Behind me, the wheels spun again. A short, sharp buzz, like a finger experimentally flicking the remote's throttle. I froze, whirling around. The car hadn't shifted from its spot on the table, but I could have sworn I saw the wheels twitch, a momentary spasm of intent. The knot in my stomach cinched painfully tight. My eyes shot to the remote on the sofa. Still off. No one near it. No one else here. I snatched up the controller, inspecting it again. Benign plastic. The battery cover, I noted, was also ajar, revealing an empty compartment. As powerless as the car ought to be. Replacing it on the sofa, I stared at the car, half braced for another display. It remained silent, mocking my vigilance. Gooseflesh pebbled my arms. I rubbed them briskly. 2 a.m. Exhaustion gnawed at me. Daylight, I reasoned, would bring clarity, a logical answer. A fragment of a battery overlooked. A deeper inspection with the proper light was needed. Retreating to my bedroom, I closed the door, burrowing under the covers. In the darkness, I listened, every nerve strained, but only silence answered. Eventually, depleted, I drifted into uneasy sleep. It wasn't long before the buzzing returned, louder this time, more frantic. A violent, skittering sound, as if the car was thrashing wildly across the floorboards. My eyes flew open, throat parched, chest constricted. I tumbled out of bed, stumbling slightly, driven by a surge of adrenaline. I slapped at light switches as I went, flooding the apartment with harsh illumination. My legs felt unsteady beneath me. The car was on the floor again, far from the table where I'd left it, now near the television stand. It spun in frantic, tight circles, front tires squealing as they pivoted almost on a single point. I stood rooted, the overhead light fixtures emitting a low, electric hum. My own breathing sounded thin and desperate. How had it moved? My memory insisted I'd placed it securely on the table. Had I? Doubt flickered, but conviction held firm. I hadn't left it there. My mouth felt like sandpaper. The rhythmic scrape of plastic on wood grated on my nerves. Taking a tentative step forward, I approached it warily, like one might approach a cornered animal. Crouching, I picked it up once more. The cold plastic met my hand. The wheels spun furiously against my grip for a moment, A final act of defiance, then died completely. Again, I checked the underside. Switch off. Battery bay empty. My pulse hammered, sweat trickling down my neck. This time, I placed the car deliberately on the sofa cushion and backed away. My phone lay on the coffee table. I snatched it up, the screen glowing. Nearly 3:00 a.m. I prowled the living room, checking the window latches, the deadbolt on the door, peering under furniture. All secure, no intruders. Stay calm, I chanted internally, but my thoughts were a frantic storm of impossible scenarios I refused to fully entertain. Practicality. Deal with it practically. Phone clutched tight, ready to record. I watched the car. Minutes crawled by. It sat inanimate. The adrenaline kept me wired, hyper alert, my heart beating so rapidly I felt dizzy. An idea sparked. A test. I retrieved the remote from the sofa armrest, examined it minutely again, flicked the power switch to on. Predictably, nothing. No batteries, no response. The little LED remained dark. Still, I held it near the car, thumbing the steering knob, pressing the throttle trigger. The car remained inert. Switching the remote off, I set it down. I raked a hand through my hair, utterly adrift. Pacing the room, my gaze snapped back to the car every few seconds. The silence felt charged, expectant. Sleep was now a distant memory. My palms were slick, my mouth raw from rapid breathing. Every creak of the building, every distant siren made me flinch. After several minutes of this tense vigil, I forced myself toward the kitchen for water. The fluorescence hummed overhead as I opened a cabinet, retrieved a glass, filled it at the tap. My hand shook, sloshing water onto the counter. I downed it in huge gulps, the cold stinging my throat, then refilled the glass, needing the simple action to occupy myself. From the living room, it started again, that same penetrating whir amplified. I nearly dropped the glass, slamming it onto the counter as I bolted back. The car was off the sofa. It sat near the coffee table, spinning. How had it traversed that distance so quickly? The wheels ground against the floor, rotating on its own axis in tight, dizzying circles. "This can't be happening," I whispered, the words scraping my dry throat. My legs felt leaden, my head throbbed. Marching toward the car, I crouched, grabbed it. The familiar struggle, then stillness. I scanned the room desperately. Nothing. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. The lights blazed. The remote lay undisturbed. My chest felt impossibly tight. This wasn't a glitch. Logic had fled. Enough. It had to go. Not just off the floor, but out of the apartment. I strode to the front door, yanked it open. A blast of cold night air hit my face, momentarily clearing my head. Stepping onto the small concrete porch, heart pounding against my ribs, I placed the car on a low wicker table near the railing. The instant my hand left it, I held my breath, waiting. Silence. No movement. The wheels were still. Only the distant rumble of late-night traffic broke the quiet. For a full minute, I stood there, eyes locked on the toy, expecting it to spring to life, to launch itself off the table. It didn't. It lay dormant. Relief, profound and trembling, washed through me. I turned, went back inside, leaving the door cracked just enough to keep the porch table in view. The car remained motionless. Returning to the living room felt like finishing a marathon. My knees buckled slightly as I sank onto the sofa, leaning forward, elbows on my thighs, staring at the sliver of porch visible through the open door. My breathing slowly steadied. My hands were damp, my shirt clinging uncomfortably. The abrupt absence of the whirring sound was palpable. The room felt blessedly normal, yet my nerves remained frayed wires. I sat like that for a long time, perhaps half an hour, listening intently for any sound from outside. Nothing. Not a squeak, not a buzz. Eventually, I rose, peered through the doorway. The car sat peacefully on the table. The quiet now felt almost unnatural, but infinitely preferable. I couldn't endure any more. Closing and locking the front door firmly, I double-checked the windows again, then extinguished the main lights, leaving only the small corner lamp burning, a fragile ward against the lingering unease. In my bedroom, I collapsed onto the mattress, my heart still thrumming a nervous rhythm. My throat ached. The clock face glowed, nearly 4 a.m. Sleep remained elusive for a long while. I lay staring at the dark ceiling, the night's events replaying in a bewildering loop. Finally, sheer exhaustion claimed me. Waking near 9, sunlight striping the room through the blinds, I felt groggy, head pounding from fractured sleep. I dragged myself to the living room. Everything was quiet, undisturbed. Stepping outside, bracing against the morning chill, I found the car exactly where I'd left it on the porch table. Still. Switch off. Battery compartment empty. No trace of its nocturnal animation. Bringing it back inside felt strange, tentative, but the bright daylight offered a thin shield of courage. On the kitchen counter, I subjected it to a thorough examination. Chassis, wiring, every nook. Nothing amiss. The remote yielded no secrets either. No hidden power, no jam controls. For the sake of sanity, I inserted fresh batteries into both car and remote. It responded perfectly, wheels spinning only on command. Normal. Removing the batteries again, I switched it off. It remained inert. No encore performance. Despite the mundane return to normalcy, the memory of the night remained, a cold knot of inexplicability. No power source, no remote signal, yet it had moved with relentless purpose. The tension lingered in my chest. Keeping it felt wrong. I packed the car into a cardboard box and drove it to a rented storage unit across town. Throwing it away felt somehow insufficient, but living with it was unthinkable. With the object gone, the apartment seemed to exhale, settling back into its familiar quietude. Sleep came easier, though sudden high-pitched whirring sounds, a blender, a distant drill, could still send a jolt of ice down my spine, but the small circling specter was gone. I never discovered an explanation. Friends offered theories: static electricity, radio interference, resonant frequencies, none convincing. All I know is that the silence, the true, deep silence, only returned when that toy car was no longer inside my home. The thought of it, even now, makes my skin crawl. Dust motes swirled in the tired afternoon light, the air thick with the scent of time and neglect, precisely what Silas had anticipated upon crossing the threshold of the old house. Creaks underfoot, wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin, knobs loose in their sockets, all expected. What arrested him, however, stood at the terminus of the upstairs hallway, a wardrobe, monolithic, its twin doors clad in mirrors. Against the backdrop of decay, it was an anomaly. Its wood, darker than ancient shadows, possessed a gleam, the glass pristine, unclouded by the years that had fogged every window pane. A tremor of unease, subtle as a gaze felt on the back of his neck, prickled Silas as he passed it, but he pressed on, dismissing the feeling. Night fell, bringing with it the urge to nest, to unpack the vestiges of his former life and succumb to sleep. Yet the wardrobe commanded his attention, a silent sentinel in the gloom. At 37, Silas sought sanctuary, a deliberate retreat from the city's relentless thrum to this forgotten property nestled in quietude. Savings buffered him. Time stretched ahead, unstructured. The house, despite its decrepitude, possessed a solid frame, a project he intended to mold with his own hands. The day had been a blur of shifting cartons, wrestling with archaic light fixtures, coaxing jammed sashes. Now, aches bloomed in his shoulders, his neck a column of tension. Solace was all he craved. He positioned his mattress upon the room's existing skeletal bed frame. The wardrobe loomed near the foot, perhaps 6 feet distant, its mirrored eyes fixed upon him. A temporary placement, he decided. Killing the harsh overhead bulb, he set a small lamp on the floorboards, casting long, dancing shadows. Cool, damp air clung to the room. Moonlight, unfiltered by curtains yet, streamed through the tall windows, silvering the floor. Glancing towards the wardrobe, he saw his own silhouette captured within its surface. He approached, rapping his knuckles against the solid wood frame. It felt dense, immovable. The hinges gleamed, incongruously new. He swung a door open, braced for the musty avalanche of moth-eaten garments or forgotten linens. Emptiness greeted him. Smooth wood panels, the faint, dry scent of enclosed space. Closing it, he confronted his reflection. Silas, clad in boxers and a worn t-shirt, hair askew, eyes shadowed with fatigue. He extinguished the lamp and burrowed into bed. Sleep claimed him, but for how long he couldn't say. Thirst eventually pulled him from the depths. Silence reigned, profound, but for the distant sigh of tires on asphalt bleeding through the thin walls. His gaze drifted inevitably to the wardrobe. Moonlight imbued the mirrors with an ethereal luminescence. He saw himself reflected there, yes, but something was profoundly wrong. His mirrored image seemed sluggish, trailing his movements like a faulty echo. When he lifted a hand, the reflection hesitated, a fractional pause before mimicking the gesture. A second, perhaps 2. He blinked, hard, attributing it to the fug of near sleep. Stiff knees protesting, Silas rose cautiously. He took tentative steps closer. The delay persisted, subtle yet undeniable. His reflection lagged, perpetually out of sync. Leaning forward, he watched the mirrored figure follow suit, but only after that pregnant 2-second gap. He mouthed a silent word. No sound escaped, yet a current of disquiet surged through him, quickening his pulse. His throat felt constricted, parched. Reaching out, his fingers met the cool, unyielding plane of the glass. His reflection's hand met his, but again, that unnerving delay. The fine hairs on his arm prickled erect. This defied logic, defied the laws of physics as he knew them. He recoiled. The reflection retreated late. Spinning around abruptly, he snapped his gaze back. The mirrored figure turned with a ponderous slowness, and then he saw it, a discrepancy that chilled him to the bone. The space behind. His reflection wasn't merely his room reflected. The perspective felt skewed. It resembled his chamber, yet it was subtly altered, degraded. Wallpaper, tattered and stained in the reflection, hung in loose strips. The bed mirrored his own in form, but its mattress sagged forlornly beneath darker, rumpled sheets. He stared, transfixed by these details. The reflection inhabited a decaying twin of his room, marked by blemishes and shadows absent from his own reality. His muscles clenched. He drew a slow, deliberate breath, the air tasting stale, inert. Leaning in once more, peering intently, he tilted his head. His reflection, lagging, copied the motion. And there, perched on the edge of the bed within the mirror's distorted world, sat a figure. A man. His exact double, same build, same tousled hair, same tired face, dressed identically in the t-shirt and boxers. But this man wasn't reflecting Silas's movements. He was independent, still watching him. Slowly, deliberately, this counterpart raised an arm, index finger extended, pointing towards the wall to the right of the bed in his room. Silas could see, in that reflected space, a section where the wallpaper was ripped away, revealing a patch of darkness beneath. The counterpart pointed impassively, his eyes locked onto Silas's. A knot tightened in Silas's stomach. Cold sweat beaded on his neck. He stumbled back again, eyes darting between the mirror and his own wall. His wall was intact. Faded floral patterns marched across plaster that, while old, showed no tears, no dark patches. He looked back at the mirror. The counterpart remained, arm outstretched, pointing. Silas's own delayed reflection stood beside him, a useless marionette. The counterpart didn't move, save for that unwavering, pointing arm. Retreating slowly, Silas sank onto his own bed, never breaking eye contact with the mirrored scene. His heart hammered against his ribs, his breathing loud in the stillness. The urge to flee warred with a morbid, burgeoning curiosity. He had to understand. He waited. After a minute that stretched into an eternity, the counterpart lowered his arm. He rose from the bed and walked towards the mirror from within his decaying realm. Though soundless, Silas perceived the faint vibration of his footfalls on the aged floorboards of that other room. He stopped inches from the glass, his gaze intense. Silas scrutinized the face. Identical, yet etched with a deeper weariness, the eyes faintly bloodshot. The counterpart reached out, pressing his palm flat against his side of the mirror, a gesture of containment, or perhaps of yearning to push through. Silas stood, legs trembling, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He advanced until barely a foot separated him from the glass. The counterpart's eyes tracked his every move. His lips moved, forming silent, indecipherable words. Compelled, Silas reached out and tapped the mirror, once, twice, 3 times. The sound was dull, flat. The counterpart nodded slowly. Then he pointed again, emphatically, at the same spot on the wall. He stepped aside slightly, granting Silas a clearer view. In the mirrored room, the torn wallpaper revealed not just darkness, but a small wooden panel fitted into the wall, secured with a tarnished metal latch. A hidden door, a secret compartment. Silas turned to his own wall, smooth, unremarkable. He pressed his ear against the cool plaster, listening. Nothing but solidity. The counterpart stepped back, resuming his seat on the dilapidated bed, arms crossed, waiting. Silas backed away from the wardrobe and fumbled for the switch on the floor lamp. Warm light flooded the room, chasing the deepest shadows. He looked at the mirror again. His reflection was still delayed, the counterpart still present, sitting patiently within the decaying twin of the room. He rubbed his eyes fiercely, but the vision held. This was no hallucination. His throat tightened again. Water. He needed water. Reluctant to leave, fearing some shift in his absence, the need drove him. He hurried downstairs, flicked on the kitchen light, filled a glass from the tap, and drained it greedily. Cold water splashed on his face shocked him further awake, though his heart still pounded a frantic rhythm. He raced back upstairs. Nothing had changed. The counterpart sat, patient as stone. He was showing him something. Silas approached the indicated wall, examining the faded wallpaper with newfound intensity. At first, nothing. He ran his fingertips along the seam where paper met the corner, pressing gently, searching. His fingers snagged on a minuscule fissure in the plaster beneath. He picked at the edge of the wallpaper. It yielded with a soft, tearing sound. Beneath lay wood, old and dark, distinct from the surrounding wall structure. A rectangle, roughly 2 feet across and 1 foot high, nestled within the plaster. A small depression near one end hinted at a missing handle. He tried to pry it loose. It held fast. Glancing at the mirror, he saw the counterpart rise again, approach the glass, and tap pointedly at the spot where the latch existed in his reality. Silas pressed his thumb against the corresponding area on his own wall. He felt a slight give, a subtle movement beneath the surface. Applying more pressure, he heard it, a faint click. The panel sprang outward a fraction of an inch. He gripped the edge and pulled. It opened onto a shallow recess. Nestled inside lay a small wooden box, coated in a fine layer of dust, unadorned. He lifted it out. It wasn't heavy. Raising the lid revealed several brittle papers and a large, heavy iron key. The documents appeared to be aged property records, some handwritten notes, and what looked like a rudimentary floor plan of the house. The script was archaic, faded. Ignoring them for the moment, he hefted the key. It felt cold, smooth, substantial in his palm. He looked towards the mirror. The counterpart watched him, his expression unreadable. He offered a single, slow nod. Then he stepped back, returned to his bed, and sat down, resuming his silent vigil. Silas waited, but no further gestures were forthcoming. Words felt useless, trapped on either side of the impenetrable glass. Silas carried the box and key to his bed, examining them under the lamplight. The papers spoke of a locked storeroom in the cellar, corroborating a detail on the crude map, an unaccounted for space beneath the main stairs. The key, undoubtedly, was the means of access. What lay within remained a mystery, but the silent occupant of the mirror had guided him here. Perhaps this discovery was the purpose. He risked another glance at the mirror. The decaying room remained, but the counterpart's posture seemed fractionally less tense. He stood and walked slowly to the mirror one last time. He raised his hand, placing it palm flat against his side of the glass. Silas mirrored the action. The barrier felt cool beneath his touch. The counterpart leaned closer, his gaze seeming to probe Silas's face. Silas saw the minute details, a tiny scar bisecting an eyebrow, the faint shadow of stubble. So alike, yet so weary. Unsure how else to respond, Silas remained, palm pressed to the glass, a strange numbness creeping into his fingertips. After several long moments, the counterpart lowered his hand. He stepped back, turned, and walked towards the door of his room. A door Silas hadn't consciously registered before, occupying the same space as his own, but leading into a hallway steeped in deeper shadow. Pausing at the threshold, the counterpart cast one final look back at Silas, then stepped through and vanished. He did not reappear. Silas waited, the silence amplifying, before finally switching off the lamp and attempting sleep. It was a fitful, uneasy rest, his mind churning with unanswerable questions. He lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the cadence of his own breath, feeling his heartbeat gradually subside. Eventually, exhaustion won. Morning arrived with sunlight and a painfully stiff neck. Silas rose slowly, muscles protesting. His first glance was to the wardrobe. It reflected his room perfectly, crisply. No decaying twin, no counterpart. He waved his arm. The reflection moved in perfect synchronicity. A pang of something akin to disappointment struck him. Had it all been a fever dream? But then his eyes fell upon the wall, the torn wallpaper, the slightly ajar wooden panel, and on the bed lay the box and the cold iron key. It had been real. He dressed, jeans, a shirt, sturdy boots. Key and box in hand, he descended to the ground floor, searching beneath the staircase. There it was, a section of paneling subtly mismatched from the surrounding wood. The key grated in the old lock, but turned. He pulled the panel open, revealing a small, cramped storeroom, thick with dust and darkness. His flashlight beam sliced through the gloom, illuminating cobweb-draped shelves, rusted tools, and a stout metal trunk. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged wood and oxidized iron. Decades had clearly passed since anyone had entered. He dragged the trunk into the hallway light. Inside, bundled letters tied with brittle string, a shattered lantern, and a tarnished metal plate engraved with an unfamiliar address. Likely the house's original designation. Nothing overtly sinister, just the detritus of lives long past. The letters detailed old repairs, forgotten debts, an inventory of furniture that once filled these rooms. None of it offered any explanation for the mirror, the lag, the counterpart. The remainder of the day passed uneventfully. Silas found himself drawn repeatedly upstairs, compelled to check the wardrobe. Each time, it presented a mundane reflection. He tapped the glass. His image tapped back instantly. He paced. It paced with him. Opening and closing the doors revealed nothing but his own room, faithfully rendered. He even ran his hand along the smooth interior back panel. Solid wood, nothing more. As night deepened, he settled into bed, lamp burning low, eyes fixed on the mirrors. Hours crawled by. His eyelids grew heavy. Still, nothing. Finally, succumbing to fatigue, he reached out and switched off the lamp. In that instant of returning darkness, he saw it. The briefest flicker, a momentary stutter in the reflection. He scrambled out of bed, heart leaping. Approaching the wardrobe, he confirmed it. The subtle, unnerving delay had returned. He held his breath, waiting. Seconds later, the familiar distortion bled into view. The decaying twin of his room materialized behind his lagging reflection. But this time, it was empty. The counterpart was gone. The bed remained unmade, the wallpaper torn, the air thick with neglect. He leaned close, searching the shadowed corners. Nothing. Just the silent, empty room. He pressed his palm to the glass. No answering presence. He waited, feeling only the coolness, perhaps the faint thrum of his own pulse against the barrier. After a long while, conceding defeat, he switched the lamp back on. The other room dissolved instantly. His reflection snapped back into normalcy. In the days that followed, Silas threw himself into the tangible work of restoration. He cleaned the hidden storeroom, filed away the old papers, tucking the box and key safely into a drawer. Each night, he checked the wardrobe. Sometimes, after darkness fell, the other room would reappear. Occasionally, he caught fleeting glimpses of the counterpart, a shadow moving just out of sight, a figure turning away. But the pointing, the attempts at communication never recurred. He was simply there, a silent inhabitant of that parallel space. Silas never deciphered the counterpart's full intention. Perhaps unearthing the compartment and the storeroom was the extent of it. Perhaps it was a plea for acknowledgement, a bridging of forgotten time. He didn't know. He continued his life in the old house. New wallpaper covered the faded patterns, floors were sanded and sealed, furniture reflecting his own taste gradually filled the spaces. The wardrobe remained, untouched, in its place by the bed. He didn't fear it anymore. He didn't try to remove it. It simply was. Sometimes, late at night, he'd extinguish all the lights and just watch the mirror. Sometimes the counterpart would appear, standing quietly or sitting on the bed or pacing his decaying room. Sometimes he wouldn't be there at all. Silas learned to coexist with the phenomenon. The initial terror had transmuted into a strange, watchful curiosity. Sleep came easier once he accepted the presence wasn't malevolent, merely other. The counterpart never threatened, never intruded beyond the glass. He had pointed the way to a secret, and then retreated into silence. Silas lived there now. The old house felt like home. He had his wardrobe with its gleaming mirrored doors. He had the indelible memory of that first, unsettling night. And every so often, shrouded in darkness, he would look into the glass and see him there, the silent watcher from the other room, moving just a fraction slower, caught in a different current of time, never smiling, never frowning, just existing. And Silas, on his side of the glass, existed too. The quietude struck first, pulling onto the crushed stone that served as a driveway. Not a restful quiet, but a palpable weight, the air thickening the moment my car door sighed open. 40 kilometers beyond the city's sprawl, the structure waited at the terminus of a slender lane, chosen precisely for its promise of seclusion, a refuge needed for the colossal project demanding my undivided mind. Escape. The inn itself was a diminutive affair, clad in weathered timber planks, its antique sign grown in a metallic complaint with each nudge of the wind. A superficial charm, perhaps. I'd envisioned tranquil nights, fertile ground for focus. What I found was altogether different. Dragging my valise across the threshold, the interior air met me, an amalgam of time-steeped timber and damp earth. Rustic, yes. Walls bore witness, lined with sepia ghosts charting the inn's slow decay and stubborn rebirth. here vibrant with fresh paint, there scaffolded like a patient undergoing surgery, another capturing a forgotten proprietor before a newly annexed wing. Mr. Finch, the current custodian, a gaunt man, tall, etched with fatigue around the eyes, presided over the reception desk. He processed my arrival, dispensed a room key, and offered, with a dry chuckle that didn't quite reach his gaze, that the building boasted a lineage of renovations and owners. Trivia, he implied, yet his eyes flickered towards the corridor, a silent edit to his narrative. Down that hallway, the air grew mustier, redolent of aged textiles and the ghost of floor wax. My room, second door, left. It protested my entry with a drawn-out squeal. Austerity defined the space: a lone bed, a simple writing table and chair, a narrow wardrobe. Paint peeled in melancholic flakes from the walls. Floorboards uttered low moans beneath my feet as I deposited my bag. Everything felt steeped in years, functional yet weary, like a clockwork toy wound down near its end. The washroom was a cramped afterthought. Basic basin, diminutive shower stall, a toilet bearing the scars of long service. Sufficient, nonetheless. Perching on the bed's edge, I felt the archaic springs resist. Not comfort, but tolerable for the duration. I liberated my laptop, my notebooks, intent on immediate immersion. The Wi-Fi, predictably frail, necessitated the Ethernet cable I'd presciently packed. Settling into the wooden chair, my thoughts wrestled with data streams and chart designs, actively ignoring the stale scent drifting from the passage and the indistinct shuffling somewhere beyond my door. An hour yielded only a tightening knot in my neck. A reconnaissance mission seemed prudent. I ventured back into the corridor, the floorboards beneath me shifting, emitting profound groans with every step. Framed landscapes, cheaply rendered, punctuated the walls. One hung askew. I resisted the urge to correct it. Beyond the lobby, I discovered the kitchen, where a young woman, Clara, stood behind a counter in a plain polo and jeans. A swift, practiced smile, then, "Anything I can help you with?" I inquired about evening meals. A simple supper, she explained, usually served around 7. When I broached the inn's past, her gaze slid away, a conversational deflection. Shrugging it off, I assured her I'd return later. Dinner convened in a small dining area furnished with 3 wooden tables. A couple of other guests were present, heads bowed, absorbed in their meals, the silence thick with unspoken things. The fare, rice, beans, roasted chicken, was adequate, though the room's atmosphere felt increasingly leaden. Outside, the wind gathered voice, the old sign swinging, a faint clang marking its rhythm. I cleared my own plate into a bin near the sink. Returning to my room, a sudden chill descended, raising gooseflesh on my arms. Just the night air settling, I reasoned. The corridors swam in dim light, doorways mere suggestions in the gloom. Inside my room, the lock clicked with satisfying finality. I tested the knob, secure. Then footsteps unmistakably on the wooden floor outside. Silence, listening intently. The tread seemed to halt near my door before receding. Heart hammering, I rushed to the peephole. Empty corridor. Another guest? Finch making rounds? I forced the thought down. Setting my phone alarm, I surrendered to the bed, its springs sighing under my weight. Sleep fractured near dawn. Water running. from the bathroom, pushing up right, rubbing grit from my eyes, I fumbled for the bedside lamp. The sound was undeniable, a torrent drumming against porcelain. I swung my legs out, crossed the cold floorboards. The sink tap was wide open, water churning violently around the drain, splashing the basin sides. A blank space in my memory. Had I left it on? Impossible. I was certain I hadn't touched it since brushing my teeth hours before. I twisted it shut, pulse frantic, stomach clenched. Exhaustion, I told myself. Forgetfulness. Back in bed, sleep became a skittish creature. Morning found me seeking coffee in the kitchen. Clara was there. "Sleep okay?" she asked. I recounted the faucet incident. Unease flickered across her face. "Happens sometimes," she admitted, then added, almost conspiratorially, that crockery had a tendency towards spontaneous destruction. Cups, glasses, found shattered without cause. She described securing the kitchen one night, everything orderly, only to discover shards littering the counters at dawn. Did Finch know? A nod, but her expression conveyed his reluctance to engage. I accepted the coffee, retreating to a table, willing my nerves to steady. The day dissolved into work, typing, reading, wrestling with the intermittent connection for necessary calls. Sporadic noises drifted from the corridor, slow, deliberate footfalls. Once, I flung the door open. Nothing. The hallway felt unnervingly still, the air itself stagnant. Lunchtime offered a pretext for escape. Down in the lobby, my gaze caught movement through the window. A figure in the garden. An older man, shapeless overalls, a floppy hat obscuring his face, hunched over the flower beds. The gardener, I presumed, tending the neglected grounds. Later, returning near dinner, I mentioned him to Clara at the desk. Confusion clouded her features. "We don't have an older gardener," she stated flatly. "A local lad mowed the lawn bi-weekly," she explained. "Young, maybe 30. No old man in overalls belonged there." A cold filament traced my spine. A neighbor, perhaps? Her tense tone suggested otherwise. Other guests, she confided, had reported sightings. Always the same attire, the same hat. Always vanishing upon approach. That night, the door lock received double attention. A chair wedged beneath the knob provided extra insurance. Sleep remained elusive. Creaking floorboards announced a presence again. I sat bolt upright, listening, mouth dry as dust. The sounds ceased directly outside my room. A pause stretched, taut with anticipation. Then, slowly, they faded. Slipping out of bed, I eased the chair aside, checked the hall. Empty. Chair repositioned, I tried again to find rest. Perhaps 30 minutes later, a distinct clicking at the door. I froze, eyes locked on the knob, breath held captive. It jiggled, softly, then stopped. Clammy sweat bloomed on my skin. A moment passed, then the unmistakable sound of the lock mechanism sliding open as if turned by an unseen key. The door swung inward an inch, halting there, a sliver of dark hallway revealed. No one visible. My hands trembled. I lunged, seized the knob, wrenched the door shut, re-engaged the lock, pressed my ear to the wood. Silence, save the frantic percussion of my own heart. Morning. I waited by the reception desk until Finch appeared. I relayed the night's events, the unlocked door. Was the lock faulty? A shrug, his gaze averted. A mumble about old mechanisms, his voice strained. Pressed, he admitted vaguely to prior trouble with the doors, then looked instantly regretful. He offered a refund and escape route, but the project still loomed. I stayed. The following days unfolded under a deepening pall of the uncanny. Shattering glass echoed from the kitchen. I found Clara standing amidst fresh fragments of broken mugs, her face chalk white. No one else present. She'd shelved them securely an hour prior, she insisted. Another evening, seeking air, I saw him again. The old man in the floppy hat at the garden's edge, kneeling by a rose bush. I called out. No response. As I advanced, he seemed to melt behind a tall hedge. Circling it revealed nothing but damp earth and grass. My hands shook, the night air biting. Focus became an act of will. Door locked, desk sometimes barricaded against it during late hours. Windows secured, yet footsteps haunted the halls at improbable times. An intermittent foul odor seeped in, suggestive of stagnant water, decaying vegetation from the garden beyond. The door, unlocking itself, became a recurring nightmare, happening twice more. Each instance began with that faint, metallic click, followed by a rush of cold air as the door eased open. Each time, the empty hallway greeted my panicked lunge, the corridor light flickering overhead like a dying nerve. Once, near midnight, I found Finch pacing the lobby. I confronted him. Had he experienced anything recently? He met my gaze with exhausted eyes. He avoided the corridors after dark, he admitted flatly, couldn't explain the phenomena, gave up trying. An apology for my discomfort, then he retreated. I lacked the energy to pursue it, feeling drained, leached of vitality by the pervasive strangeness. Final night, a 3 a.m. call of nature, the bathroom faucet, again, gushing at full force. I silenced it, a curse escaping under my breath. Heart thudding, I crawled back into the complaining bed, eyelids heavy, mind racing, the project, the door, the oppressive weight of the place. Lying rigid, staring at the ceiling, listening. Dawn brought a fragile, exhausted sleep. Waking felt like surfacing. Packing was swift, decisive. Enough. The project's incomplete state mattered less than escaping this tension. Carrying my bags to the car, my eyes swept the garden. Empty. Just shrubs, scattered tools, no sign of the hatted figure. The wind held its breath. The inn seemed poised, watchful. I felt unseen eyes on my back. Checkout was perfunctory. Finch avoided my gaze, murmured thanks for my stay. A mumbled reply, then escape. Into the car, engine turning over, a wave of pure relief washed through me. My chest expanded the moment I hit the main road. The drive cityward was muted. The hum of tires on asphalt a soothing mantra. A glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting the gardener's silhouette on the empty highway behind me. Nothing. The inn remains an unsolved equation, an anomaly. No explanations were ever offered, none truly sought after a point. Only the residue of wrongness, the remembered chill of phantom footsteps, self-opening faucets, unlocking doors. A certainty lingers. I was not alone in those time-worn corridors, and leaving was the only sane choice. Reality fractured the afternoon. A stranger's gaze met mine from the glossy confines of our family chronicle. The dissonance was immediate, a palpable wrongness settling deep in my gut. It was one of those languid Sundays draped in stillness, the air thick with dust motes dancing in slanted sunlight. An archaeological dig through the closet's forgotten strata unearthed it. The hefty, leather-bound album bequeathed by my grandmother, its spine softened with age. Years had passed since I'd last traced its embossed cover. Anticipation, tinged with the bittersweet scent of decaying paper and tanned hide, settled over me as I sank into the embrace of my worn velvet armchair, the album a weighty tome upon my lap. I eased open the cover, expecting the familiar sepia smiles of my Genesis. But the very first photograph delivered a jarring blow. Where my parents, Miriam and Arthur, should have stood, radiant on their wedding day, posed an unknown couple. A woman veiled in white, a man stiff in his suit, their faces utterly alien. A blink, a hard swallow, surely a misplaced memento, some forgotten branch of the family tree. Yet, page after brittle page revealed the same insidious substitution. Birthday candles illuminated by unfamiliar children, beach holidays populated by phantoms, festive gatherings hosted by specters. My family, excised, replaced. The backdrop, however, remained chillingly accurate. The precise pattern of the wallpaper in my childhood room. The gnarled oak overlooking my grandparents' farmhouse. The curve of the bay where summers unfolded. My history, meticulously recast with strangers. My breath hitched. These interlopers weren't merely pasted in, they belonged there, their postures echoing the very memories I cherished, their smiles mirroring remembered joys. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I slammed the album shut, the thud echoing in the quiet room, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs. A prank? The thought flickered, grotesque and improbable. Who possessed the malice, the almost supernatural skill to orchestrate such a violation? These weren't pixels easily manipulated. They were tangible artifacts, silver halides capturing moments decades gone. Instinct screamed to call Celia, my sister. Surely she would be my anchor in this bewildering storm. But my thumb hovered over her contact, paralyzed by a chilling counterthought. What if her reality was already aligned with this counterfeit lineage? What if, to her, these vacant eyes belonged to us? The phone slipped from my grasp. Drawn back by a morbid compulsion, I reopened the Chronicle of Lies, forcing myself to scrutinize each tableau. Tiny fissures began to appear in the facade. A child at the shore, ostensibly in the 80s, sported a t-shirt emblazoned with a logo conceived only 5 years ago. Peeking from behind a supposed 70s-era family gathering, the unmistakable chrome glint of a late-model sedan. These weren't errors offering solace, they were fractures in the fabric of time itself, deepening the disquiet into something cold and profound. The remainder of that dislocated Sunday bled into a night of obsessive scrutiny. Armed with a notepad, I charted each temporal anomaly, each discordant detail. By dawn, exhaustion frayed my nerves, my head throbbed with unanswered questions, yet clarity remained elusive. Sleep offered no respite, only a chaotic reel of familiar landscapes haunted by unfamiliar smiles. A brittle resolve formed with the morning light. Answers lay with those who should know best. Clutching the album like a shield, I drove to my parents' house across town, arriving unannounced. Miriam, my mother, opened the door, her customary warmth faltering at the sight of my drawn face. "Ilara, darling?" "What is it?" she murmured, guiding me into the familiar hallway. Words failed me. I simply opened the album to the first page, the ersatz wedding portrait. Her reaction sent ice sluicing through my veins. No bewilderment, no flicker of confusion. A soft smile touched her lips. "Ah, yes," she reminisced. "Your father, Arthur, was so flustered, he nearly mumbled the dog's name instead of mine." My breath caught. I flipped frantically to a childhood birthday scene. And these children? My voice trembled. Miriam chuckled, a sound utterly incongruous with my rising panic. "That's you, pet, turning 10. Don't you remember how Celia sulked, furious it wasn't her celebration?" I stared, aghast. The girl blowing out the candles bore no resemblance to my childhood self, nor the pouting sibling to Celia. How could she not see? For the next hour, I presented image after image, my desperation mounting against her serene, unwavering recognition of these impostors as kin. When my father arrived, his gaze mirrored Miriam's concern, not for the photos, but for me. Gently, Arthur suggested overwork, the mind's peculiar susceptibility to stress. Perhaps a rest, a visit to Dr. Evans. I stumbled out of their house adrift in a sea of cognitive dissonance. If my own parents perceived this fabricated past as truth, was I the variable? Had my own mind betrayed me, substituting phantoms for flesh and blood? The ensuing weeks became a blur of frantic inquiry. Every other family photograph I possessed echoed the album's deception. Tentative calls to aunts, uncles, old neighbors yielded the same baffling consensus. The faces were correct, the memories aligned. A private investigator, hired in desperation, unearthed nothing. Official records stubbornly corroborated the photographic evidence. The strangers, it seemed, were my family. Doubt, insidious and persistent, began to erode the foundations of my own memory. Perhaps this was reality, and my recollections were the aberrations. I carried the album everywhere, a constant, morbid companion. Then, one gray afternoon in the anonymous hum of a cafe, salvation arrived in the form of a frail, sharp-eyed woman at the adjacent table. Mrs. Gable leaned closer, her gaze fixed on the open album before me. "Goodness me," she breathed, a tremor in her voice. "I haven't thought of the Larkins in ages. How do you come to have their picture?" My heart leaped. The Larkins? The name hung in the air, electric. She nodded, tapping a delicate finger on the couple who stood in my parents' place. Elias and June Larkin lived next door to me on Elm Street back in the 70s. Such a dear couple. Air rushed back into my lungs, sharp and clean. Validation, sudden and absolute. I wasn't adrift in madness. Another soul perceived the same disjointed reality. For the next hour, Mrs. Gable became my oracle, patiently navigating the pages, assigning names to the faces that had colonized my past. They were real. The Larkins, the Prestons, the Changs, individuals with their own narratives inexplicably woven into mine. Fueled by this breakthrough, I plunged back into the labyrinth. Following the threads Mrs. Gable had provided, I located distant relatives, unearthed old acquaintances of these other families. A fragmented, almost unbelievable picture emerged. A bizarre confluence, a temporal knot where separate histories had somehow fused within the emulsion of these photographs. The how and why remained stubbornly veiled. Who possessed the power or the motive to orchestrate such a profound manipulation of personal history? And the most haunting question, why was I the sole witness to the seams? My family remains oblivious. inhabiting the narrative presented in the album with unwavering conviction. The chronicle now resides hidden in my closet, less a collection of memories, more a monument to their terrifying mutability. The faces of the Larkins and the others are etched into my mind now, as familiar as those I thought I knew. A phantom kin, occupying the spaces where my own family used to reside in memory. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night, I retrieve it, tracing the lines of those alien faces. If photographs can betray, if memories can be so thoroughly overwritten, what anchor remains? In a reality demonstrated to be permeable, what else might shift beneath my feet without notice? The album is a testament to an enigma I may never unravel, a permanent question mark embedded in the heart of my existence. It serves as a chilling reminder to distrust the surfaces, to peer into the shadows. For sometimes the most unnerving truths are not buried, but staring back, daring us to see. The attic wasn't a space I frequented. It was a repository of neglect, a dusty crown atop the house I shared with Clara. Ambition, fueled by a mutual pact to reclaim our home corner by corner, finally drove me up the rickety pull-down stairs. Years of accumulated detritus awaited. Ghost shapes of furniture draped in sheets, skeletal remains of forgotten projects, cairns of cardboard boxes. The air hung thick, smelling of dormant wood and time itself. A single, bare bulb sputtered reluctantly to life, casting weak, dancing shadows. My mission was simple: purge. But behind a barricade of scuffed leather suitcases, leaning against the rough-hewn rafters, I found them. Photographs. Monochromatic portals to another time. Sepia had yet to warm these stark black and white prints. Their subjects, clad in the stiff formality of a bygone mid-century, were utterly alien to me. Men in the sharp, narrow suits, women with severe hairstyles, adolescents frozen mid-grimace. Not one face sparked recognition. Each resided in a plain, unadorned frame. Yet a shared tension radiated from them, shoulders held rigid, gazes either piercing the lens with unnerving directness or averted, as if shying from an unseen blow. A current, cold and sharp, traced a path up my spine. Flipping through the first few, I uncovered more, stack upon hidden stack. Dozens. Who were they? Why secreted here? This house, inherited from a great uncle whose silence now seemed profound, had offered no hint of this hidden gallery. Beneath the hesitant pulse of the attic bulb, I carried a selection to a dilapidated table. Dust filmed the glass, transferring fine grit to my hands as I searched their backs. Blank. Utterly anonymous. The chill in the attic deepened, unrelated to the draft seeping through unseen cracks. Goose flesh prickled my arms. Logic screamed to box them up, haul them down, forget. But a ravenous curiosity had sunk its teeth in. I needed to see them, properly. Unearthing a rusty hammer and a fistful of bent nails from a shadowed corner, I claimed a patch of bare wall near the attic hatch. 4, then 5, portraits found their place. Stepping back, I felt their collective gaze converge. Faded eyes, yet they held an intensity that coiled unnervingly in my gut. Work ceased for the day. The small gallery established. Downstairs, Clara wrestled with overflowing bookshelves. "How'd it go up there?" she asked, distracted. "Dusty," I offered, the word feeling inadequate, evasive. Explaining the disquiet the photos stirred felt impossible. a formless anxiety I couldn't yet name, so I held it close. Sleep proved elusive that night. Darkness pressed in, my thoughts snagged on those unfamiliar, tense faces. Who were they? The question echoed until exhaustion finally claimed me. Then, from the deepest well of night, around 3, a sound surfaced. Faint, rhythmic tapping, directly overhead. Old house settling, I reasoned, the familiar nocturnal groans of timber. But this persisted, delicate yet distinct, like hesitant footsteps pacing the attic floorboards. Pulse quickening, I glanced at the clock's cold glow, rubbed sleep from my eyes and strained to listen, telling myself paranoia was a poor companion in the dark. Eventually, silence returned, or perhaps I simply willed it. Morning light, thin and gray, filtered into the attic as I returned. My gaze went immediately to the wall. The neat row I'd established seemed disturbed. Subtle shifts, fractional tilts, one frame hanging slightly askew as if nudged by an unseen hand. Drafts? The windows were sealed tight. Vibrations? The floor felt solid, the thick dust undisturbed. A shrug, a forced recalibration of logic. I straightened them and dove back into the chaos of boxes. Yet, throughout the day, my eyes kept straying to the wall. Each glance brought a flicker of wrongness, a perceived change in facial angle, a trick of the shifting shadows. Just before midday, certainty struck. One frame was definitely tilting, its top edge leaning away from the plaster. Reaching to adjust it, a sudden wave of frigid air washed over my back. I spun, finding only empty space and swirling dust motes. When I mentioned the wayward frames to Clara later, she offered a gentle smile and practical advice. Loose nails, probably. Stop fixating, Elias. We can bring them down if they bother you. But I wasn't ready. Not yet, I insisted. I want to figure them out. She saw the obsession blooming, perhaps, and let it be. Before sleep could claim me that night, compulsion drew me back. Flashlight beam cutting the gloom, I ascended the attic stairs. The overhead bulb flickered on. At first glance, the gallery seemed unchanged, but drawn closer, focusing on the faces, something had shifted. The tension remained, yes, but now laced with a desperate quality, an almost pleading aspect in their eyes, as if they yearned for release, or perhaps conveyed a warning. My heart hammered against my ribs. Imagination, I chided myself, reading emotion into faded emulsion. Turning off the light, plunging the space back into darkness, I started towards the hatch. A sharp scrape echoed behind me, wood on wood, like a frame being dragged. I whirled, flashlight beam slashing wildly. The portraits hung undisturbed on their nails. Nothing seemed out of place on the floorboards. Only the echo of the sound and my own ragged breathing remained. Palms slick with sweat, I retreated downstairs, the silence of the house feeling suddenly fragile. The following days brought a subtle symphony of unease from above. Sporadic tapping, the soft lament of creaking floorboards. Clara heard them occasionally, attributing the sounds to the house's old bones settling deeper into the earth. But for me, each noise snagged on frayed nerves. Up in the attic, the wall gallery became a source of constant, unnerving scrutiny. The frames never stayed put. Not dramatically rearranged, but their spacing would seem subtly altered. One hung infinitesimally higher, another a fraction lower than I remembered. I found myself constantly readjusting them, a futile attempt to impose order. And the faces, with each visit, their distress seemed to deepen. Eyes, flat and photographic, appeared to track my movements. A trick of light and perspective? I tested it, shifting my position, seeking the optical illusion. But the sensation persisted, accompanied by that familiar icy prickle at the nape of my neck whenever I lingered too close. Night 4 shattered the quiet with a resonant thump directly overhead. Adrenaline jolted me from bed. Flashlight clutched tight. I stole up the stairs, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The attic light revealed the source. A single frame lay face down on the floorboards. Miraculously, the glass remained intact, though the backing board had popped loose, the photograph slightly askew within. I knelt, retrieved it. The hanging wire was sound. Above, the nail stood firm and true in the plaster. No earthly reason for its fall. Holding it, I peered closely at the subject. A man, brow deeply furrowed, eyes fixed ahead as if anticipating a collision. A detail surfaced, previously unnoticed. His tie knot sat slightly crooked, a subtle imperfection suggesting haste or disruption. Carefully, I reseated the photo, secured the backing, and rehung the frame, testing its stability. Silence descended once more, thick and watchful. Sleep was now a foreign country. Downstairs, cocooned in the artificial glow of the television, I tried to anchor myself, but my thoughts spiraled relentlessly back to the attic, to the frames. Why did they move? How could expressions shift on paper? A knot of cold dread tightened in my stomach. Action was needed. Either banish them or unravel their mystery. The next day, I phoned Reese, a friend with a penchant for vintage cameras. Could old prints warp, change appearance? Humidity, light exposure, fading? Yes, he confirmed, but not in the dynamic, unsettling ways I vaguely described. I kept the moving frames, the footsteps, the chilling presence to myself. His practical knowledge offered no solace. Back in the dusty realm above, I sifted through the remaining stacks, prying open frames, desperate for a name, a date, any inscription. Only blank cardboard stared back. With Clara out for the afternoon, I returned to the attic, seized by a new idea. Perhaps a different configuration would reveal something. I pulled down the initial few and began arranging a larger display, a long row of 12 with another 5 positioned beneath. Stepping back to observe the effect sent a fresh wave of unease through me. The subjects in the lower row seemed angled. Their gazes weren't directed at me but tilted upwards, fixated on the portraits hanging above them. The implication sent my pulse hammering in my ears. Frantically, I swapped positions, shuffled frames, but the effect lingered. No matter the arrangement, the tense urgency remained, now tinged with this bizarre internal focus. A profound sense of trespass washed over me, as if I'd stumbled into a silent, ongoing drama I had no right to witness. As evening bled into night, the footsteps returned, not tapping now, but slow, measured treads crossing the attic floor above. I froze at the base of the ladder, listening, scalp prickling. Anyone there? My voice sounded thin in the stillness. Silence answered. Ascending, warily, flashlight preceding me, I switched on the light. Several frames weren't hanging. They were propped neatly against the base of the wall, resting on the floorboards. No sign of fallen nails or broken wires. I picked one up, the man with the crooked tie. His eyes, I swore, were now subtly averted, gazing towards the edge of the frame, as if observing something just beyond its border. Enough. This quiet haunting had stretched my nerves too thin. Retrieving an empty cardboard box, I began dismantling the gallery, frame by unsettling frame. A strange reluctance permeated the act, a psychic drag urging me to leave them be, to let them watch, but fear propelled me forward. Packing hastily, I missed one, a portrait near the hatch, a woman with stark, wide eyes and fists clenched at her sides, left hanging in my hurry to escape. The box, taped securely shut, felt heavier than its contents warranted. I hustled it down, not stopping until it was consigned to the cool darkness of a storage closet off the garage. A measure of relief washed over me as I finally sought my bed. Perhaps containment was the answer. But in the pre-dawn hours, a violent intrusion shattered the peace. A loud, grating scrape erupted from the attic, the unmistakable sound of something substantial being dragged across the floorboards. It persisted for agonizing moments before culminating in a heavy, final thump. My heart leaped into my throat. Chest tight, breath held captive, I lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, imagination painting terrifying scenarios. The lone frame left behind? The stacks of boxes toppled? By what force? Morning, I told myself. I would face it in the morning. Pulling the duvet higher, I squeezed my eyes shut, seeking refuge in forced oblivion. Now, daylight fills the living room, but the unease lingers, a low hum beneath the surface of the ordinary. The attic remains silent for now. Clara suggests professionals, junk haulers, structural inspectors, practical solutions for what she perceives as house quirks or my overactive imagination. Perhaps she's right. Yet a deeper, colder certainty insists I must understand the source of this disturbance. Those photographs, they weren't just pictures. They felt like conduits, apertures into something shadowed and persistent. They reside in the closet, locked away, but is distance enough? Because every night the soft tread of footsteps returns overhead, and with each dawn I brace myself, half expecting to find the attic hatch ajar, the wall repopulated, those intense, troubled eyes fixed upon me once more. That anticipation, that certainty of return, is the ghost that truly haunts my waking hours. An insidious sweetness, clinging yet vaguely metallic, bloomed on my tongue the instant the complimentary elixir passed my lips. A premonition, cold and sharp, pierced through the vacation euphoria. Too late. The world began to swim, edges blurring like watercolor left in the rain, my limbs turning to sodden weights. Through the haze, I saw the resort attendants, their practiced smiles curdling, twisting into masks of predatory intent. This sun-drenched escape, I grasped with sickening certainty, had just become a beautifully appointed trap. It began, as such things often do, with the lure of the unattainable. Clara, my wife, and I had scrimped for months, dreaming of turquoise waters and indolent days. Serenity Cove appeared like a mirage, 5 stars shimmering in a tropical haven, offered at a price that felt almost illicit. The testimonials sang its praises. The photographs depicted paradise incarnate. We succumbed without a second thought. We arrived under a benevolent sun, the percussion of waves against the shore a welcoming rhythm. Serenity Cove's lobby was an ode to extravagance, all polished stone and soaring glass, crowned by a chandelier like a frozen firework. An attendant approached, grace personified, proffering 2 flutes of azure liquid. "Our signature greeting," she purred, her voice smooth as silk. "A taste of the island." I sipped. Delicious, undeniably, yet beneath the sugary surface lurked a bitterness, an echo I couldn't identify. An unfamiliar fruit, perhaps? I dismissed the flicker of unease. As we completed the check-in formalities, the staff's attentiveness felt almost suffocating. Their eyes, bright and unblinking, seemed to track our slightest movements, their smiles fixed, immutable. Exceptional service, I told myself then. Now, the memory chills me. I should have heeded that primal warning. Our suite surpassed expectations. A bed vast enough to get lost in, a balcony commanding the ocean's expanse, a bathroom grander than our city apartment. The first day dissolved in a blissful exploration of meandering pools, the exclusive sweep of beach, the tempting array of dining venues. But by dinner, a strange lethargy had begun to cloud my senses. My thoughts felt thick, my actions sluggish. Clara confessed to a similar fogginess. Jet lag, we concluded, compounded by the potent equatorial sun. An early night seemed prudent. Morning brought not clarity, but deepening strangeness. We awoke to find an attendant silently replenishing the minibar. My query about his presence elicited only that unwavering, vacant smile before he vanished wordlessly. At breakfast, a disturbing pattern emerged among the other guests. They drifted as if submerged, their gazes glassy, unfocused. A tempting conversation with a couple nearby yielded only platitudes about the resort's wonders, delivered in oddly rehearsed cadences. I turned to Clara, my disquiet cresting, only to find her staring into the middle distance, her fork hovering forgotten above her plate. "Clara?" My touch on her arm startled her. She looked at me, but her eyes held the same unnerving emptiness I'd seen in the others. Panic fluttered in my chest, a frantic bird beaten against my ribs. Something was profoundly wrong. Muttering an excuse about needing air, I fled the dining area. Crossing the opulent lobby, my eye caught a door, slightly ajar, marked "Personnel Only." A furtive glance confirmed I was unobserved. I slipped through. The transition was jarring. Gone was the luxurious veneer, replaced by a sterile corridor bathed in the unforgiving glare of fluorescent tubes. Muffled voices emanated from a room further down. Stealthily, heart hammering, I crept closer. Latest cohort shows excellent receptivity to the protocol, a male voice stated clinically. Phase 2 initiation should be viable by tomorrow. Superb, a woman responded, her tone sharp, efficient. The benefactors require results. This new formulation demonstrates superior efficacy. Benefactors? Formulation? Ice water seemed to flood my veins. Peeking around the doorframe, my stomach clenched. A laboratory, stark and chilling, stretched before me. Rows of beds held inert figures. Guests, I realized with horror. Attendants in white coats moved among them, adjusting monitors, checking intravenous drips. A gasp must have escaped me. Suddenly, every head in the room snapped towards me. The smiles were utterly gone now, replaced by cold, appraising stares. "It appears we have an inquisitive specimen," the woman observed, her voice devoid of inflection. "Secure him." I spun, intending to flee, but my legs felt mired in unseen treacle. The drug, whatever it was, still held sway. Halfway down the corridor, rough hands seized me, dragging me inexorably back towards the sterile nightmare. They strapped me onto an empty gurney, my struggles and protests ignored. The woman loomed over me, a hypodermic needle glinting in her grasp. "A pity," she remarked conversationally. "You might have enjoyed a truly restful stay. Now, regrettably, you must join our little undertaking somewhat prematurely." The needle pierced my skin, a fiery serpent coiling through my bloodstream. The room tilted violently, voices warping into grotesque echoes. "What? What are you doing?" I choked out. Her smile returned, a terrifying rictus. "Advancing humanity, my dear Leo. Cognitive refinement, physiological optimization. You fortunate patrons are the vanguard of progress." The truth struck with physical force. This wasn't a resort. It was a facade, a harvesting ground for illicit human trials. As darkness encroached, my last conscious thought was of Clara. Was she lost already? Would I ever see her truly again? I don't know how much time elapsed. Consciousness returned amidst the familiar luxury of our suite. Clara slept beside me, seemingly undisturbed. For a fleeting, desperate moment, I clung to the hope it had all been a grotesque nightmare. The distinct puncture mark on my forearm, however, screamed otherwise. I shook Clara gently, relief surging through me as recognition flickered, then bloomed in her eyes. "We have to leave," I whispered, the urgency raw in my throat, pouring out the story of the hidden lab. Skepticism warred with nascent fear on her face. I thought I was just having strange dreams," she stammered, "but now I can barely recall yesterday." We packed with frantic stealth, our movements furtive, breaths held tight. Opening the door, however, revealed an attendant stationed outside, that same unnerving smile fixed upon his features. "Is everything satisfactory?" he inquired, his tone benign, his eyes chips of ice. "Perfect," I lied, forcing nonchalance, "just heading for an early stroll on the beach." He nodded slowly, but as we moved past, I saw him murmur into a concealed radio. We attempted a casual gait through the lobby, yet I felt 100 unseen eyes boring into us. The main entrance was almost within reach when a piercing alarm shattered the morning calm. "Code Red," a disembodied voice boomed from hidden speakers. "Runners confirmed." All pretense evaporated. We bolted. Shouts erupted behind us, the heavy thud of pursuing feet echoing across the marble floor. We burst into the blinding sunlight of the parking lot. A taxi, depositing new arrivals, was just pulling away. Instinct took over. I wrenched open the rear door, shoving Clara inside. "Go!" I yelled at the bewildered driver. "Please, just drive. Now!" Whether it was the sheer terror in my voice or the sight of uniformed figures streaming from the resort, he didn't hesitate. Tires squealed as the car lurched forward, accelerating rapidly down the coastal highway. Clara and I clung to each other, trembling violently with adrenaline and residual horror. We were out, but the escape felt incomplete, tainted. What had they implanted in us? How many others remained ensnared in that gilded cage? We reported everything to the authorities in the nearest city, but our frantic tale was met with thinly veiled disbelief. Our word against a prestigious, well-regarded establishment with no tangible proof. By the time any formal inquiry was reluctantly initiated, Serenity Cove had vanished, closed abruptly, its staff and remaining guests seemingly evaporated into the tropical air. Months bled into a year of medical examinations, doctors searching for answers in our bloodstreams. They found anomalies, unidentified chemical markers, but the long-term consequences remain an unnerving question mark. Nightmares still plague us, vivid replays of sterile corridors and vacant smiles. Sometimes I wake drenched in sweat, convinced I'm strapped to that gurney again. Clara occasionally drifts, her eyes glazing over with that terrifyingly familiar emptiness before she shakes herself free. I doubt we'll ever fully shed the shadow of Serenity Cove, but we recount our ordeal, a chilling testament to the darkness that can fester behind polished facades and irresistible bargains. So, should you ever encounter an offer that whispers of perfection, flawless shores, unparalleled luxury, a price too good to be true, pause. Consider the true cost of paradise. The welcoming smile, the proffered drink, might just be the key unlocking a nightmare from which escape is not guaranteed. Acquiring that looking glass was folly. The thought loops, a frantic prayer, as I sit entombed in my own flat, gaze fixed upon the shroud-draped void where it once presided. My fingers tremble, staining this parchment, yet this chronicle must be etched. Perhaps some soul will decipher this descent. Perhaps credence will find me. 3 weeks passed, the genesis. I ambled down Ashworth Lane, adrift before some tedious appointment, when a storefront materialized. A curiosity shop unseen before, wedged between familiar facades. Its window, a chaotic tableau, skeletal chairs heaped high, tarnished brass lamps askew, dust motes dancing in trapped light. And, amidst the clutter, the speculum. Unremarkable at first, perhaps 4 feet of height, an oval embraced by somber timber, yet it arrested my steps. Was it the paltry sum scrawled on its tag? $75 for such apparent substance? Or was it the peculiar alchemy of its reflection, rendering the mundane streetscape behind me with an unnerving, hyper-lucid intensity? A chime sighed above as I breached the threshold. No proprietor emerged. The air hung thick, a tapestry woven from decaying paper and lemon oil. Sunlight, filtered through panes opaque with grime, illuminated swirling dust like ephemeral spirits. Is anyone present? My voice swallowed by the stillness. I navigated the labyrinthine piles, brittle magazines yellowed like old teeth, chairs crippled and lame, towards the looking-glass. Closer inspection revealed intricacies unseen from the pavement, delicate filigrees of leaf and tendril twining along the dark wood. The glass itself, unnervingly flawless, a pool of silent quicksilver untouched by time's passage. He materialized at my elbow, silent as fallen dust, causing me to flinch. An ancient man, swallowed by a moth-eaten cardigan, his pale gaze magnified into unsettling moons by thick lenses. A striking artifact, is it not? His voice, a papery rasp, barely disturbed the air. Teutonic artistry. Fin de siècle. The price? I inquired, the tag already known. $75, a flicker of something unreadable behind the spectacles. A pittance, truth be told. Such pieces command far more. Warnings whispered unheard in my mind, the ludicrous price, his quiet insistence. Yet visions of it gracing my sterile apartment eclipsed caution. The bargain was struck. He swaddled it in coarse brown paper, assisted me with its weight to my vehicle. I departed without knowing his name, a curator of shadows. For a senile, tranquility reigned. I installed the speculum opposite my worn divan in the sitting room. It lent a certain gravitas, an anchor of antiquity in my otherwise featureless dwelling. Passing glances offered only my own familiar form. Elias heading out, Elias returning weary. Mundane reflections. Then the subtle incursions began, mere flickers at first. Ensconced on the divan one twilight, television droning, a peripheral flutter snagged my attention. A direct gaze revealed only my mirrored self, the static room behind. Yet, avert my eyes, and the phantom motion returned. A flitting umbra, an indistinct contour pirouetting just beyond the threshold of focus.